FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
So I'm just going to tell you briefly about the premarital class that we attended. And you sort of had to go and take blood tests, and you had to have sort of the government officials there sign off on the marriage contract that you sort of had done all of these things. And so after the blood test, we were told, well, please go and wait for the premarital class. And I thought, well, it's obviously going to be about contraception, because I had friends and they said, well, it's just about contraception. So I went to the woman, I said, I went to elementary school in California. I learned all of this there. Can I skip the class? And she said, no, there's really new stuff. You should go and you should sit. It'll be interesting. There might be things you don't know. So I said, fine. And the men and women were separated. So I went into the women's room and I sat there. And it did start out to be a talk about contraception. And she said, well, how many of you know what emergency contraception is? And most of the women didn't really know. And she went on to explain what that was. And it's actually a form of contraception that has been controversial even in the West, in this country. Wasn't widely available maybe 10 years ago here, but is now sort of widely available in Iran. She explained how young women could go into pharmacies. Every woman in the class was sort of given a little pack of all of these different kinds of pills, and she sort of outlined all the different kinds of contraceptive methods that are available. And this is partly because the government runs a really, really savvy and effective family planning strategy. It's lowered its birth rate very successfully. But I was fairly impressed at how sort of sophisticated all of this was, and how even these sort of most modern of methods were sort of everyone was comfortable with them and being taught about them. And then the conversation shifted, and that's when I was really surprised, because the teacher then started explaining to all of these young women who were of very different backgrounds. There were a few young women in chador and a few very sort of modern young women, but it was really just a mix. And she began explaining that they should all enjoy the sexual aspect of their marriage. And she was really went to sort of pains to say women's bodies are different. The process for women becoming aroused takes longer than men, and you have to teach your husbands this because it's not something that they might know. And the women were just curious and throwing up their hands and sort of asking really frank questions about sexuality. And the lesson that was sort of imparted to all this is that, even no matter what they've sort of been taught at home, or what the traditional idea of sort of feminine sexuality is in this very traditional culture, that women had a right to enjoy sex in their marriage and that they should assert themselves. And I thought it was pretty tremendous that this was the message that was being communicated by the government in its official premarital classes. And what is it responding to? How does this come about? Well, I think it sort of likely has to do with rising divorce rates, because the rate of divorce in Iran is incredibly high, and the government is concerned about this. And it's trying to respond to that through encouraging sort of better marriages, and sort of trying to step in and sort of help maybe traditional young couples who come from families where these things aren't talked about, to sort of guide them along. And it's sort of an instance where it is trying in its own way to respond to the very changing mores and needs of these young people.